Thanks. I'm Mike Hess. I'm one of the advisors here for Pumps and Pipes. I work with NASA, and it's my pleasure to introduce Mark Geyer. He's the Center Director of NASA Johnson Space Center. He's been here at Johnson Space Center 30 years here in the community. He's got his engineering degrees from another Big Ten school, Purdue. So I'm a Michigan guy, so at least he's Big Ten. Throughout a significant portion of his career, he worked in the International Space Station program, being chair of the mission management team, running the ISS program integration office, and Rice Business ought to pay attention to this thing that Mr. Geyer accomplished. He was lead negotiator with Russia on space station requirements and policy, so he could certainly enlighten Rice Business with some of his stories, I'm sure. He's been deputy program manager of our Constellation program, and he was program manager for Orion. That's the next vehicle that will take humans beyond low Earth orbit and out to the moon. He'll talk a little bit about that. He's been our deputy center director, and he was acting deputy associate administrator for technical for the Human Exploration and Integration Office at NASA headquarters. And in the headquarters, that's one of the major roles that headquarters has. So he got to see the breadth of human spaceflight across the agency. And after that, he became our center director. He's the 12th center director of Johnson Space Center. I'd like to welcome Mark Geyer.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. It's an honor to be here. It's a blessing to live in Houston. From my office, I can see on the 9th floor, Building 1, I can see all the refineries out in Baytown and Pasadena, and all the oil and gas companies that are so important to the economy of the United States and to Texas. And I have a child who personally is alive today because of the skill at the folks at Methodist. So it's great to be here today and talk a little bit about our collaboration, the kind of things that we do at Johnson and how it might link to the future of technology in Houston. So if we go, I guess I'll just do this. Is that how, next page? Okay. This is a little bit of video showing kind of if you're floating through the International Space Station as of last week, we've had Americans in space for 19 consecutive years. So there are kids that have been born and never lived a day that didn't have an American in space. This shows you kind of the experiments that we do, and then right at the end there's something labeled an astronaut. So the ISS, we continue to, in low Earth orbit, it's 200 miles up. We continue to do experiments. I'll talk a little bit more about that, about the effects of microgravity on the human body. Here's a picture of our astronauts in space today. There are 6 of them. So we have 3 Americans, an Italian, and 2 Russians. We're in the midst of doing many extravehicular activities outside, 11 EVAs in the next few weeks. And of course, a week and a half ago, we had the first all-female EVA with Jessica and Christina. So a great team, heroes really. It's still a very risky and dangerous environment to be in space, and they do this for us every day. Also, I just want to point out, again, as Mike mentioned, the space station is international, and so one of the positive things that we have today with our Russian counterparts is that we go into space together, and we live and work in space every day together with our international partners. We also are testing and examining how the body changes. We know that there are things in microgravity, the body behaves differently. The body is, of course, an incredible machine, and it tries to adapt in zero gravity. If you remember, in the past, we saw a lot of bone loss. We also see fluid shifts. We also see impacts on gene expression. All of these things we are looking and actually finding some mitigations for in case we have to send people into space for a long period of time, like going to Mars. It could be 3 years. So we investigate all of these things. And of course, we have partnerships with the medical experts here in Houston and around the world. We've done one year-long test, of course, with Mr. Kelly, and now we have plans to do more year-long experiments, because even though we thought we saw how the body behaved in short term, as we find the longer in space, we see actually different things occur. So we need to understand those as we go further and longer into space. I did want to mention briefly, explain a little bit NASA's job. Of course, the obvious part is that our job as a government entity is to explore, and to explore for the benefit of the world, but also specifically the United States. So you see that exploring low Earth orbit and then exploring the moon in the future. But we also, part of our job is to develop an economy for the United States and to create opportunities for commercial companies to innovate and be able to actually to make, find a niche for themselves. So if we look at the next page, if I go one more page, there you go. Well, give you an example of some of the partnerships. So on the far left, if you look at SpaceX and Northrop Grumman, we needed cargo for space station, obviously food, clothes, and other things that the crew members and spares and everything to run the International Space Station. But we decided to buy cargo delivery in a different way. Instead of owning and designing the spacecraft ourselves, we put out and we said we're going to buy a service. And that service was deliver cargo to the United States. But the companies can own the vehicles. So this allowed the companies to innovate themselves, and we actually created, because of the way we bought this, we created a launch capability in the United States that has actually brought business back to the United States. If you think about SpaceX is really the biggest example of that. This cargo opportunity allowed them to grow into the company that you see today. And now we're actually in the process of buying crew delivery services, both the SpaceX Dragon and Boeing Starliner, which will both launch probably within the next few months, actually launching Americans from Kennedy to the International Space Station. Again, we have a need, and how we buy things, how we go procure that can affect the ability of these companies to make money and create an economy for the United States. We're doing that same thing at the moon now. If you look at the far, let's see, right on your chart, the commercial lunar payload delivery services. We have payloads, scientific payloads. We want to get to the surface of the moon because we're going back to the moon to explore. So we offered, again, we want to buy a delivery service. So we're starting out with small payloads, 10 kilograms or so, and we put out this procurement, and all these companies, some of them you'll recognize, but some of them are very small and startups. Some are in this actual community, in the Houston community. So again, we're creating opportunities for companies to start, to actually get services and actually create a capability for the United States. Again, so NASA has a job to explore, but how we do it can actually help and create an economy. As I said before, within a few months, we'll launch people, Americans from the United States, back to the space station. You'll see SpaceX suit on the left and the Boeing suit on the right. So even the suits look different. But this, again, gives the companies a chance to innovate. And now they can, after they do the job for us, the national program, they can actually sell flights to private individuals. If private individuals want to go into space and create their own capability, they own this capability. So it's a chance for companies to put their own skin in the game. That helps us in a national program and creates an economy for the United States. So now we're going forward to the moon. The administration put out this Space Policy Directive 1, which gave us a direction to land the first American woman and next American man at the South Pole of the United States by 2024. And then obviously the goal is not just to go, but to stay there. So this is a big charge for us. It's an exciting mission. It's an exciting challenge. And we are in the process of putting together the plans for that. So I think a lot of you might know this, but why go back to the moon? So first of all, the United States, when it leads in exploration, this is a big part of our strategic national emphasis. It's part of what makes America great, is the fact that we push the boundaries. It also allows us to prove technologies and capabilities that eventually we would send people to Mars. I was inspired by Apollo. Many of you might have been. I was 11. I just aged myself there. I was 11. I know I went in. It motivated me to study engineering and math. I had a lot of friends that also did that, even though they never ended up in the aerospace industry. So we know that these kind of great adventures can actually inspire kids in education. It can also push technology. I'll talk about a few of those. It helps the U.S. global economic impact. I mentioned about how we're trying to do that. And it broadens our international partnerships, which is a soft power thing that's very important in the world today. A lot of good reasons. So this program is called Artemis. That's the symbol. And of course, you might know, if you study your mythology, Artemis was the twin sister of Apollo and the goddess of the moon in Greek mythology. Now she really personifies this new program, which again, as I said, to get the first woman and next man on the surface of the moon, back to the surface of the moon on the South Pole. So here's let's see, next page. Good. So how do you get there? Well, it takes a lot of energy to get to the moon, right? If you think about Space station is 200 miles up, so we're talking about going 1,000 times further than that to go to the moon. You'll remember Apollo had a very large rocket, the Saturn V rocket, so you need a big rocket to do that. That's what the Space Launch System is about. Orion is the capsule system where the crew sits, much like Apollo, if you remember it, but it is updated, state-of-the-art equipment. This system will fly by the early parts of 2021, and then we'll actually have people in it a couple years after that. So we'll be going back to the moon, which we have not done since 1972, in a couple years. The system is coming together today. Orion is basically completed. It's actually doing its testing, and the rocket will actually start doing its fundamental stage testing after Christmas this year. So a lot happening with the system that'll be the beginning of getting us back to the moon. On the next page, I think it's just a picture of Orion. Again, Orion is a capsule. It's different. You remember Apollo, we flew 3 people. Orion can hold 4 or more. This allows us to, once we get to the surface of the moon, to do more exploration because it's larger and allows us to stay longer. The other part we're doing is actually creating an orbiting platform around the moon. Why do this? It's small, but it basically allows us to do a couple things. It allows us to access all parts of the moon simpler. Remember, Apollo was mostly around the equator, mostly. This allows us to access all parts of the moon, and it also allows us to reuse key parts of the system, including the lander. If you remember Apollo, incredible missions, but we threw all the pieces away. With the Gateway, we can actually reuse the lander. It comes back up, or we can refurbish it and then launch it again. So the Gateway is the beginning of that. The Gateway will launch its first elements in the 22-23 timeframe. So we're building a capability, flying humans out there, and then pushing toward landing on the moon by 2024. I think given the interest of time, I think I'll, if we go to the next chart, is basically outlining all these different pieces, including those small lunar payload services I mentioned before, where we start then to investigate the surface of where we're going to land again with those small delivery services, and then Orion, and then the Gateway being assembled, and then eventually landing on the surface again. We're also building a suit, great pictures of our EVA suit. That EVA suit is awesome. It's also a fairly old design in the 80s, basically. So now we're updating that design, both for use on space station, but eventually for surface use. And that allows us, a lot more mobility, also to include people of a lot of different sizes, and actually upgrading the reliability of the system. That suit development and design is led right here at Johnson Space Center. So these are the technologies that will drive our ability to access the surface sustainably. The first is, if you're upper right, solar electric propulsion. This is the propulsion of the Gateway. This allows us to do very low mass orbit keeping and maneuvering to allow the Gateway to be in the orbits it needs to be. Obviously, precision landing is going to be very important, especially at the South Pole, where the surface is a lot different than what you remember in Apollo, where it was very simple and mostly flat. The South Pole is going to be a much more difficult place to land. Cryofluid management, because the propellant we use, if it's not managed well, it boils off and you don't have the propellant that you need. And then also, how do we use the resources of the moon? We know the regolith. This is basically the soil, like on the moon, has resources we can use, but you actually have to take those and actually turn them in and create the oxygen and other materials that we use. So how do you do that? We have ideas. We need to test those out. So these are examples of the kind of things that we're tackling now to make the exploration of the moon sustainable, and then now's the time to go. So it's an exciting charge we have from the administration. We're doing everything we can to make this mission also affordable, and a big part of that is synergizing with experts, including those like you here in Houston, to synergize with technologies and needs that we both have to be as efficient as we possibly can. And the last is all the social media stuff, which I mostly don't understand, but other people do this for me, for links back to NASA and everything we're doing. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak. Appreciate our partnership in Pumps and Pipes, and look forward to a lot of the more interesting speakers. Thanks, Stephen.